I do not know who I am. I do not know where I am. All I know is that I must kill.
As a 40k virgin, I was not eagerly awaiting the release of Space Marine 2, nor had I played Space Marine 1 or any other Warhammer 40k title for that matter. Despite that, I, like many, found myself in search of something to fill the void left by the gradual degradation of franchises like Halo and Star Wars, which in modern times have descended into a state of disarray and despair under studios that either don't understand or don't care about them. Unlike Games Workshop, which in my limited understanding has held their ground against the modern trend of corporate creation committee complacency, and have remained a harbour of consistency where 40k lore remains sacrosanct. So with the announcement of Space Marine 2, I got curious. The trailers were solid, the gameplay looked fun enough, and with a combination of recommendations from my fellow Helldivers, and of course, the word of Henry Cavill being law, I picked up the game not long after release. Initially, I felt the gameplay was reminiscent of games like Doom 2016 and Gears of War, and if I'm being candid, I was not completely impressed. There was no co-op collision mechanic, there was limited pathing options in missions, and some areas that appeared explorable were blocked by invisible barriers. The levels were frustratingly linear, and the gameplay began to feel very repetitive very quickly. In all honesty, were it not for the impressive next-gen graphics, I would have called Space Marine 2 a product that belonged in the mid-2000s, an unremarkable hack and slash that failed to innovate anything new and lacked some pretty fundamental mechanics that have been standard since 2005. So subsequently, I put the game down. I pride myself on being fairly close to the mark with my initial reactions, so seeking confirmation of that fact, I sought out various online reviews.
I miscalculated.
And what can I say? I was wrong. So it was evident that I was missing something, because the vast majority of the online reviews were praising the game with 4 to 5 stars, with only the occasional review echoing my feelings on the matter. And in cases like 40k, the masses are not generally wrong. So I sought out my personal 40k historitor, and I asked them what they thought. They loved it.
Naturally.
And confirmed that the game was pure Space Marine fan service. The 40k love letter that most fans had been hoping for. So perhaps it was that simple. As a normie, I lacked the important context to appreciate the game's finer points, and was too busy focusing on it as a general sci-fi hack and slash. So I went to the Warhammer 40k wiki to gain some context.
Oh my goodness!
Having no idea where to start my learning, I returned to my historitor and asked if I should go back and play Space Marine 1, or Dawn of War, or something else. He told me probably not if my problems were lore and context based, and if I was so inclined, perhaps I should read some 40k lore, starting with Horus Rising. So I sat down with the first book of the Horus Heresy and started reading.
Oh my god. I get it.
The hypermasculinity, the visceral blood and gore, the raw military testosterone, the clash of industrial war machine against the raw power of nature and the warp, the heraldry, the brotherhood, the heroism and the horror, the order and the chaos, the grim dark universe that forges men into boys. It's a glorious nightmare, beautifully broken and unapologetically cruel. I love it. So after binging several 40k novels, I jumped back into Space Marine 2. All of a sudden, I could appreciate the dialogue, the characters, the locations, the armor, the bolters, the enemies, all of it. Space Marine 2 is an absolute throwback to a time when games knew who their target audience was, and more importantly, knew how to give that target audience what they wanted. What I initially would have described as overly simplistic or undercooked quickly became an appreciation for the intent behind the game. I was so busy focusing on what Space Marine 2 was not, I failed to appreciate what it was trying to be and what it actually is. And what it is pure, unadulterated awesomeness aimed at its target audience. So grab your bolter, brother.
Burn the heretic! Kill the mutant! Purge the unclean!
Once I recalibrated my sights, I quickly began to appreciate how faithful the game is to the existing lore, which is an absolute novelty in the modern era of Western gaming, and very much appreciated, even by a newcomer like myself. There is nothing in the design of Space Marine 2 that wasn't deliberate and considered, beginning with the small details of the Cadians having purple eyes, to the correct size ratio of Space Marine armour compared to the Astra Militarum, through to command skulls, servitors, and oaths of moment. The game is awash with details that 40k fans will not only notice, but absolutely froth over. And the best part, none of this detail is superficial, it all has meaning and pages of lore behind it. 40k fans will hold you to account if your creation is anything less than authentic, and Saber Interactive absolutely stepped up to bat here. Space Marine 2 was clearly built from the ground up by people that live and breathe 40k. I hadn't found myself skyboxing and level combing like this since the days of Resident Evil 4. So well played, Saber. The game you've constructed perfectly captures the 40k aesthetic, and I was only too eager to pick through its pieces. Each mission is a veritable masterpiece of environmental storytelling, with the Astra Militarum as its centerpiece.
Looks like a slaughter. No excuse for cowardice.
The sheer scale of death and horror is very much part of 40k's DNA, and each mission of the campaign delivers on it with raw, unapologetic detail. So when you do manage to save a platoon of Imperial Guardsmen, you really do feel like the hero that they see you as, because you absolutely have to earn it. The campaign commences with a Tyranid invasion on Kadaku. Too bad they didn't invade Kotaku instead and rid us of their stupidity, where Kill Team Primus of the Death Watch have been tasked to deploy a virus bomb in defense of the Aurora facility. Immediately I have froth details. Your character is a Black Shield, which meant nothing to me the first time I picked up the game. But after reading some lore, I can appreciate that as a Black Shield of the Death Watch, your Space Marine has renounced or been cast out of their chapter, meaning their armor pauldron is covered and doesn't display the chapter's sigil, unlike the other Brothers of the Watch, whom have their chapters displayed and are evidently in the Watch voluntarily. I'm sure that there are other countless accuracies throughout the campaign that fans will appreciate, but god damn, that is some impressive attention to detail just as an opening benchmark, I must say. You are initially separated from your squad as the game walks you through the movement and combat tutorial. And, as I mentioned earlier, the sheer bulk of the Space Marines in terms of their movement is very reminiscent of Gears of War. The key difference, though, is that Gears of War is primarily a cover shooter. Breaking cover at the wrong time will see you turn to pink mist before you can ask for the number of the bus that hit you. Space Marine 2, much like Doom 2016, encourages a bias for action and aggressive offense. Health and shields only regenerate upon successful counters, kills, and the all-important glory kill, which becomes an essential mechanic of the gameplay. Cover is not your friend in Space Marine 2, because as an Astartes Primaris, you do not require it. You are literally a walking tank, a god amongst common men, engineered to vanquish the Emperor's enemies with absolute prejudice. Something that I didn't appreciate when I first picked up the game. To do this, you are afforded a primary gun, a secondary sidearm, and a melee weapon. During the early missions, the Adaptus Mechanicus will recommend or dictate which weapons you are to take into a mission. But as the game progresses, you unlock more options and are encouraged to experiment with your playstyle to find weapons that best suit you. The game also regularly signposts upcoming segments with weapon drops that are appropriate to the next gameplay area, i.e., you'll be given a short-range weapon for close quarters versus being given a long arm when you're fighting at range. You are eventually spoiled for choice with primary guns, from short and medium-range bolters, plasma weapons and flamers, to long-range sniper rifles through to rapid-fire heavy weapons. And while the game encourages you to use specific guns at certain times, you can melee your way to victory should you choose poorly or run out of ammo. Each melee weapon has their own unique combos and movesets that will lend themselves to either crowd control, tank killing, or PvP. And while in the campaign it is possible to mash your way through problems on lower difficulties, learning each weapon's combos will hold you in good stead should you look like being overwhelmed. Fortunately, the combos are relatively simple to learn, albeit difficult to master, so the learning curve isn't too punishing for players unfamiliar with melee combat mechanics. Everything in Space Marine 2 feels like it has weight. Weapons and armor are massive, industrial and heavy, designed to fight in the grimdark universe, and I think this is why comparisons are being drawn between Gears and Space Marine, as both games do an excellent job of capturing the ridiculous sheer weight and size of their macho protagonists, and you feel it in the game's movements. There is nothing floaty about the movement mechanic. It's heavy, kinetic, and visceral. Something that 40k fans have been waiting to see realised for a long time. And funnily enough, none of these design choices are coincidental. While Saber Interactive has its own proprietary software that we'll discuss shortly, the team has a wealth of experience working on other titles, such as Quake, Doom, and Halo, just to name a few. Warhammer has been around for over 40 years, and whether or not people are aware of it, it doesn't diminish the influence it's had on the world of gaming. Fallout's power armor, the Chainsaw Lancer in Gears of War, and even the original Doomslayer's design.
It's all reverse engineered by studying him.
It's a Primaris Marine.
That's what we call it.
So it's quite appropriate that the games inspired by Warhammer are now helping Warhammer reach its realisation in the video gaming medium. Saber Interactive, the team behind Space Marine 2's development, were keen to make a sequel that was not only a worthy successor to the original, but also cleared the very high bar set by 40k fans. To that end, it took until the proof of concept seen in Doom 2016 before they felt the technology was ready to make that leap. It's unclear how long pre-production took for Space Marine 2, but from my understanding, once Saber were confident that they had the right formula, they took the pitch to Games Workshop and went, "Imagine Doom 2016's Glory Kills, but with Space Marines." To which Games Workshop went,
You son of a bitch.
Space Marine 2 went through close to 4 years of active development, including delays that saw the original 2023 release date pushed back to late 2024. From all accounts, this was so primarily because of the inclusion of PvE and PvP modes. Saber were intent on ensuring the progression system was not only workable, but worthy. Imagine that. It also allowed them additional time to polish up the campaign and root out any lingering glitches in the game's design. And to that end, this is the reason why there is no friendly player collision mechanic. In a game dominated by furious melee combat, often in tight corridors, the designers chose function over fashion, foregoing the friendly collision mechanic in favour of freedom of movement, allowing player combos to flow and complement each other against the enemy swarms rather than hindering gameplay. This is a great example of understanding one's medium. Space Marine 2 is a co-op shooter game first and a single player story second, so prioritising the primary co-op gameplay design over the single player mechanics is absolutely the right call in this instance, and is very much a point in favour of, rather than omission due to laziness, as I may have misjudged initially. Not to mention that every design decision, no matter how slight, needed vetting and approval by Games Workshop, from dialogue to world design. Puts fire in my gelatinous spine knowing how much Games Workshop care and actively protect their IP. Microsoft, take note. And I know I speak for the majority of gamers when I say I wish more companies would take this approach and take the time to get it right rather than rushing to failure. Following the tutorial, your protagonist is revealed to be Titus, the main character from the previous Space Marine game, who has now served 200 years in the Death Watch due to accusations of heresy. From all accounts, the story was designed to be accommodating of new players who hadn't necessarily played the original, but at the same time deliberately targeted at 40k fans. But in spite of this, the story rarely, if at all, takes a moment to stop and explain lore for new players. Things are what they are, and if you don't understand what's going on, you better go read some lore, scrub. And if this is what accessible to newbies looks like, I shudder to think what the gatekeeping version might have looked like. This is a bold strategy, making the game just accessible enough to new players so as to not overwhelm, but also to deliver on the rich lore that 40k fans have come to expect from their IP. And frankly, I'm here for it. While the lore is deep, the story itself is simple in its delivery and is a throwback to a more traditional time when narratives didn't always seek to deconstruct or recontextualize. In the grim dark, everything is trying to kill you, so you need to kill before being killed, and look epic while doing it. But if I was to offer some salty conjecture, I would assess that this is one of the many reasons Space Marine 2 is marketed as a co-op shooter. Because while the game is absolutely brilliant even for a lone newcomer like myself, once you accept that you don't know who or where you are and all you know is you must kill, it is exponentially more fun with a friend who can take the time to elaborate on the lore throughout the story, because it is as vast as it is deep. While the lack of lore explanations isn't necessarily gatekeeping in of itself, it is a steep curve for those new to the franchise. But as I said, Space Marine 2 is a 40k love letter for existing fans in the first instance, and newcomers just have to hold on for the ride. The game knows who its target audience is, and that's all that matters if a developer is looking to have success. And you know what? That's how it should be. In an era where studios are increasingly casting wider and wider nets to catch as many normies as possible, and therefore make the most profit they can, Saber Interactive said, "Hold my bolter, brother." Principal gameplay sees your squad of 3 Space Marines fighting against massive swarms of enemy that literally cover the map and backgrounds with their numbers. This is made possible by Saber's Swarm engine and the AI manager. The Swarm mechanic, known as Swarm 2 in Space Marine 2, is an evolution of the Swarm engine from World War Z, but whereas the zombies in World War Z were stupid and merely relied on their numbers to surge and devour, Swarm 2 has more nuance. Initially, enemies will swarm in massive numbers towards the player, as they did in World War Z, but once they break into the combat area, the AI manager takes over, shifting to more dynamic AI decisions for one-on-one combat situations. The AI manager assesses your style and then seeks to counter it, whether that's through additional ranged enemies to counter your melee prowess, or by seeking to overwhelm your sniper position with high volumes of enemies. The Swarm 2 engine does its best to keep encounters engaging and different with each playthrough. Space Marine 2's gameplay loop is very reminiscent of Bungie's 30 seconds of fun, nailing the first few seconds of a new encounter that delivers on a dopamine rush that keeps you wanting to do it again and again. Appropriately enough, 40k has seen something of a cycle of inspiration and influence throughout the sci-fi genre and gaming shooters in particular, with Space Marine 1 inspiring Doom 2016, only to have the glory kills of Doom 2016 inspire the combat design of Space Marine 2. From the CCO of Saber, Tim Willits, whether it was Fallout, Halo, Doom or Gears, Space Marine 2 has taken many elements that it originally inspired in others to produce something that is simply great fun to play and an absolute love letter for 40k fans. Complementing the campaign is the co-op PvE operations mode, which runs in parallel to Titus's story. Each mission includes a PvE operation of another Ultramarine squad, which often contributes to the primary objective of the main story. These missions are great fun and allow you to see the operation from a different perspective, increasing the scale of the game's narrative. They're also slightly different each time you play them, which allows for countless replayability, whether you're alone and with the AI or squatted up with your buddies. If I was to be a little critical, the friendly AI can be a bit dopey at times, including failing to revive you and simply watching you bleed out for the crime of weakness. But all things considered, it is a relatively minor nitpick that didn't hamper my experience of the campaign. Still further again, the Eternal War mode is the PvP portion of Space Marine 2, which sees the loyalist Space Marine factions doing battle with their Chaos counterparts. While PvP is not my bag personally, it is a welcome inclusion of many, and the class and progression systems are well fleshed out, providing incentives to keep playing both PvE and PvP post finishing the main story. Saber has also released roadmaps promising continued support to the title, including future story DLC, more operations, and of course, additional character customizations that will allow you to play as your favourite Space Marine chapter. All things considered, Space Marine 2 is a beautifully executed throwback to a simpler era in gaming that not only understands its target audience, but celebrates them in a grimdark gore fest of military industrial testosterone. And I couldn't recommend it more if you're searching to fill the void left by other IPs. Just take heed, brother. There is no hand-holding in the grimdark universe, so grip your bolter close. But remember, I'm just a brainless lump who pledges eternal service to the Emperor. Hooroo, Skipper.